I must confess to you this morning that I am often puzzled that so many people have difficulty accepting the true humanity of Jesus. And they resist the truth, this truth that his life as a true human being was probably more like our own than we want to admit. We may celebrate at Christmas the birth of Jesus, the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger filled with straw. We may imagine the fearlessness of a young mother and the nervousness of a father as they make the best of a bad situation in Bethlehem of Judea. What we fail to do at Christmas or any other time for that matter is to acknowledge that the relationship between Jesus and Joseph and Mary was just like our relationships with our sons and our daughters, our husbands and our wives. A relationship filled with all the normal challenges and transitions that come with being a family. The gospel writer says Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and favor with God and others. And I would say to you, he grew in that way just like any child born of a woman. I've called upon Mary this morning on purpose. I've called upon her to be an example for all mothers and for all children who must face the law of separation, which I believe is inescapable. I call it the law of separation because recently I have come to embrace the idea that there are certain laws that guide the relationships of human beings and our lives that are just as set and just as reliable as, say, the law of gravity. I've become to believe that just as a law of gravity invisibly shapes and sustains the world in which I live, and I dare not test it, when I'm driving down the road, I do not go so fast that I cannot stop in time because I know what the laws of gravity dictate if I exceed time and speed and distance. I also believe there's a law of love that invisibly shapes and sustains all the relationships of our lives. And we can either embrace these laws or we can ignore them. Part of the law of love that I realize is also the law of forgiveness. I recognize that human relationships can be broken, but I also declare to you that they can be mended as well. But to be mended, we have to recognize their brokenness. We have to patiently listen to one another. And finally, we have to choose to forgive each other. This is a law of forgiveness. If we practice it, it works. If we ignore it, we continue to experience broken relationship after broken relationship, rarely finding one that has been mended. Another dimension of this law of love, at least for me, is the law of separation. Here today on Mother's Day, it is my desire to point out the reality of this law of separation and to say to you that it is necessary, it is healthy, and it is an inescapable dimension of the relationship between parent and child. I've called on Mary this morning simply because we have preserved for us in the Gospels at least two descriptions where where Mary comes face to face with the reality of this law. I've chosen Mary because we have so little information about Joseph as a father. I've chosen Mary too because I think for those mothers who are still striving for perfection, she might finally be a guide for you on this Mother's Day. A reminder that perfection is a misguided expectation when it comes to being mother. As we may observe, as Marnie did in the reflection for today, a child in the mother's womb is completely hers. But immediately at birth, there begins a process of separation. Separation when the child becomes aware of themselves, that they are indeed a human person entirely separate of the mother who brought them into the world. The child separates when it nurtures a mind and a will of its own and begins to express it. And the final separation is seen when a child finally chooses to live a life on their own, separate and distinct from family, from mother and from father. Now, it would have been very helpful in preparing this sermon today if the Gospels offered us at least one picture of Jesus going through the terrible twos. But it doesn't. Or I would have given my right hand to have Jesus telling Mary, I can do it myself. Or Jesus snatching a toy from another playmate and saying, mine, and Mary prying it out of his hand to teach him how to share. You see, all of these events are steps along the way in fulfilling this law of separation, and it is right, and it is healthy, and it is inescapable. The first picture we have of Mary dealing with this law is when Jesus is 12 years old. Passage of Scripture that TJ read a while ago. Depending on your own perspective, how you hear this story, you may read or hear it as the fact that Mary and Joseph are just awful, terrible parents. After all, they lose their boy Jesus in a big city, and he's gone for 4 days without them. Is there a mother here this morning who would turn their 12-year-old loose in Louisville for 4 days, alone? Or you may conclude that Jesus is just a disobedient child, intentionally hiding from his parents, or maybe starting the journey with them back home to Nazareth and then deliberately choosing to go back to Jerusalem for a few more days in the city. But I advocate to you this morning that Mary and Joseph are not negligent, nor is Jesus willfully disobedient. But rather we are witnessing those moments when the law of separation becomes clear to both mother and to child. Jesus is 12 years old. He has finally reached an age and a level of maturity that Mary and Joseph can take him with them to that giant city of Jerusalem for the celebration of the Passover, that time of the year when the crowds in Jerusalem were their largest of the entire year. It was his first time to go. And like any 12-year-old, he is enamored by the city. And because of who he is, he's attracted to the temple. And somehow in the temple, something comes alive in Jesus. Something that has never been there before inside of him. Something so powerful that he cannot bear to leave the temple at all. Call it whatever you will. But there in the temple at the age of 12, Jesus caught a glimpse of the reality that his personal destiny involved more than Galilee and Nazareth and carpentry and Joseph and Mary. Somehow on that day in the temple at age 12, Jesus realized that he was in his Father's house, and that was exactly where he should be. Something in that first visit to Jerusalem changed about Jesus. But now Mary is like any mother. And just like any mother worth her salt who's lost her boy in a big city for 4 days, she's worried, sick unto death. After all, she doesn't have any idea where he is, where he has slept, who has fed him, or if he has had anything to eat at all. This is not Nazareth. There's no one in Jerusalem she would ever trust to take care of her boy. When she finds Jesus, she says what every mother says. Son, do you realize what you have done to your father and I? And Jesus seems puzzled by his mother's reaction. He thinks that she should have known where to find him. This boy of 12 thinks his mother should have known that there was more about him than to simply live his life being Mary's son and Joseph's little boy. This experience of the law of separation was very hard for Mary to embrace. She doesn't understand, the gospel writer says, why Jesus would have said such a thing to her. She just doesn't understand. But Jesus, the scriptures say, went on home to Nazareth with his mom and dad. The next glimpse we have of this law of separation is certainly more critical. Jesus is no longer a boy of 12. He is a fully grown man of at least 30 years of age. But once a mother, always a mother. And Mary comes to get her son. Why does she go to get her son? Because all the way back in Nazareth, she has heard what the people are saying about him. They're saying that he is crazy as a loon. They're saying he's beside himself. They're saying he's possessed by an evil spirit. And Mary wants her son. She wants to protect him. She wants to shield him. She wants to bring him back home, set him down at her table, tuck him in his bed, and take care of him until all these bad things go away. But this time, Jesus is not going with her back to Nazareth. In fact, in the strongest terms possible, Jesus is going to repudiate his mother. He cannot be Joseph's little boy, and certainly not Mary's little boy. He cannot go home. He cannot allow his mother to corral him into a smaller world than he was destined to live in. And so she cannot understand his destiny, and he can't give up on it. So in something both painful for mother and for child, Jesus rejects Mary and the family. Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? But those who hear and do the will of my Father in heaven. The law of separation is inescapable, even for Mary, the mother of Jesus. Jesus has to be himself, and thank God he insists on being himself. And to be himself, he must separate himself from his mother, a process that truly began at his birth. You see, this law of separation is quite significant for both mother and child. It is a tension within their relationship from the day of birth, and it must be acknowledged. If we refuse to acknowledge it, there are consequences. If we choose to hold our child, to smother them, to cover them, there are consequences. This law of separation, though, also needs to be embraced, for it is natural, and it must be prepared for, because both mother and child have to go this way. It's just not that mother has to embrace the separation or that child has to embrace the separation, but both, mother and child. Across the years, I have witnessed the pain and the anguish of both mothers and their children when this law of separation is denied. It can be quite frightening. It can make mother and child think that their relationship has been broken forever, that it is irreparable. Sometimes this struggle against this law of separation ends in bitterness and resentment and estrangement. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. Because it is natural. It's the way that life goes. If we go with it, if we follow it, then both mother and child can be happy. The relationship that's forged can be one of respect and of friendship. But regardless, whether we resist it or embrace it, this law of separation is inescapable. It will come. Now, for Mary's sake, I want to suggest to you that somewhere over those 3 years between Jesus beginning his ministry and that awful day on cross, they negotiated the challenges of separation. I believe that, or I want to believe that, because one of the final acts of Jesus in this life is to turn his mother over to the care of his beloved disciple. Breathing his last, he takes care of his mother. Whatever separation might have been, might have come, it was inescapable and it was necessary for them both. But life did not have to end with separation, but with both of them aware that they were mother and son. And the gift of being mother and son transcended everything else. The words they had spoken to each other, the hurt they had inflicted upon each other, the joys that they had shared with each other, the life that had been theirs to enjoy as mother and child, it was more valuable than all the pain that might have come as they resisted the law of separation. At some point, not just mothers, and mothers, I know that, but also fathers, we have to remember that a child, no matter how they come to us, that son or daughter is a gift. God himself places that gift into our hands and into our love. And that child grows best, and we know most about being mother if the laws of love are followed, which call for tenderness and embrace, that call for words of kindness and understanding, and yes, call for forgiveness of one another. But we have to realize that we have to let them go. And only when we let them go will they come back to us, and our hearts will be filled with joy. I spent 30 years looking for words for today like today, and these are the best I've found from a very wise person. Hear them. Your children are not your children. They are sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life does not go backward, nor does life tarry for yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hands be gladness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so also he loves the bow that is stable. Moms, in God giving you a child, He has given you an amazing gift that He sent not only to you, but to the world. It is your sacred calling to help your son or daughter find the path of flight he or she is destined to take. And in doing that, no, you'll never be a perfect mother, but you will become the mother your children rise up and call blessed. And if your life with your sons or daughters are not on that trajectory today, remember the law of forgiveness. Acknowledge the brokenness. Listen carefully to each other. Forgive. And with forgiveness, forgive again. Begin again. And if your mother is no longer present for this moment of reconciliation, no, you may still forgive. And the power of that forgiveness will change you today. Today, on Mother's Day, let us celebrate and give thanks for all the blessings we receive from mothers. And let's vow to forget whatever else we're carrying. Mothers and women who serve as mothers, may God bless you today with peace and with joy. Amen.